second question. When a lot of people say that interpreting is a fairly sort of a job because you have to be fairly intelligent, but you're not supposed to be overly intelligent to an extent that when you interpret somebody, hey, what am I supposed to interpret for the guy who is far less intelligent? And sometimes a lot of people say, hey, saying, you know, don't you think it's beneath your dignity to be called 通訳 instead of 通訳者? And could you discuss a little bit about your anger?
Well, no, there was no anger about it, but I was chagrined by people calling people who interpret in Japanese 通訳.
Right.
Because I always considered the term 通訳 as a verb, doing something.
Abstract noun.
That the person who carries out this particular verb is a person, a live human being.
Right.
And that therefore the person should be recognized as 通訳者. Just as a translator is called either a 翻訳家 or a 翻訳者. You see. I said there's hardly any difference in terms of language work between interpreting and writing and translating. Basically, it's the handling of languages, and particularly handling one language and transferring it into another language. Either you're doing it in writing or you're doing it orally. It's the same exercise in basically, I thought. And simultaneous interpreting is something else. And so therefore, I insisted that individuals who do interpreting should be called 通訳者 and not just 通訳. Fortunately, the term 通訳者 has been adopted by all interpreters now. They call themselves 通訳者. Because I was carrying the torch. I was carrying the torch for all the interpreters.
Wow.
Today, there are many interpreters. There are, I don't know how many interpreters there are who are very competent, active people, and they are 通訳者.
Now, sometimes I see some kind of...
Excuse me for interrupting. Just one more thing. The dictionaries still do not recognize this.
Not yet. It doesn't...
And someday, I hope that the dictionaries, 講談社 included, the published dictionaries, will start saying 通訳 is defined as the verb, and then the person who does this 通訳 is a 通訳者. When that appears in the dictionary, it will become really official. It's just the same as now you call people who are nurses 看護師, regardless of whether it's a woman or a man. It's a 看護師. And by law, now, it's been defined as that, and so you refer to these people who are nursing as 看護師, not 看護婦, you see, or 看護人. It's 看護師, she. The term for sheep that you use for gishi and other types of sheep. And I hope that someday it will become an official change in the Japanese language. But until then, all professional interpreters now, at least most of them, call themselves 通訳者, not 通訳.
So may I interpret this way? The reason you want 通訳 to be called 通訳者 is logical, not emotional. Emotional response to the sort of experience you have.
I don't know.
It's logical because the 翻訳 must be 翻訳者. It's a logical.
Yes. Well, very fortunately, logic was on my side.
Right.
But in a sense, it was somewhat emotional because
I
personally felt a little insulted when people called me a 通訳. when people call me a tsuyak, I feel a little insulted.
Both logical and emotional.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that sense, it was partly emotional, but also very much logical.
Now that's very clear. But another question is, where did you get the idea of an invisible person when you refer to an interpreter?
Well, the interpreter is not the star of the show.
But the interpreter must have a certain self-esteem.
It's the speaker who is must be the star of the show. If the interpreter becomes so prominent that people are, paying more attention to the interpreter than the speaker,
right?
Well,
How am I
that
doing?
means that the interpreter is overextending his or her role. Ideally, as I said, of course, it can't be invisible, but ideally, the person must be so well trained and so able in interpreting that ideally the person should be invisible. And of course now, on television programs where there is a foreign person who is speaking, not a non-Japanese person speaking, and that person is being interpreted simultaneously, the subtitles shows who is doing the interpreting, but the interpreter is invisible. Right. The interpreter is not there on the show. So in that sense, on television now, interpreters are invisible. But back in many years ago, when there were very few who did the interpreter often was on the show. I was on the show a number of times as an interpreter, and very visible. And I don't think that is good. I think that ideally the interpreter should be as invisible as possible, because he or she must not steal the show.
And to be heard, not to be seen.
That's right.
Now that's clear. Like, when I first heard you say that, call me tsuyakusha instead of tsuyak, I thought that would go against the principle of invisibility.
I see.
So that was a part, blame it on the ambiguous Japanese language we had discussion previously. So that's been in the back of my mind. Now everything's clear.
I see.
Due to English language.
That's good.
So another thing is the word mottainai. And Glenn Fukushima said it's impossible for anybody to translate the concept of not mottainai. He said it threw his hands up in despair. Can't translate it. If he can't translate, who can except you?
Well, I think that Glenn is certainly right in saying that it's very difficult to translate that term, mottainai. It reminds me of Mr. Akio Morita, who was at that time chairman of the board of Sony at the time, who often used to give very interesting talks in the United States and Europe and other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And he would always do it in English. But one time in one of his speeches, he brought up the subject of mottainai. Mm-hmm. And he used the Japanese term, because he said there's no way you can translate it in English, but he said it's a combination of being very careful about the use of things, because if you'd waste anything, that is mottainai. Yeah. And he described what the meaning was. And it was funny. Americans, for example, who heard Mr. Morita's speech, started saying, and so it's mottainai, isn't it? And they started using the term mottainai. But, it's a combination of, almost in English, you would say, it's a shame to waste something.
It's a shame, that's very close. Or, too bad.
Or that you have to be more careful about.
But when you say,
Yeah.
for example, Sen Nishama is a qualified interpreter, it would be more time for him to be interpreting for ambassador when he can be an ambassador himself. That's more night. How would you say that?
What? I don't understand what you mean.
Yeah, it's you're wasting your talent. Not when you can well be ambassador yourself, but you are interpreting for ambassador. People say that would be mottainai.
No. I don't think that's mottainai at all.
But that's your personal opinion. My question is,
no.
how do you translate in that respect?
No.
When I said you deserve to get the Nobel Prize.
I wouldn't regard being an interpreter, no matter how able an interpreter is in other fields, as being as a mottainai usage of that individual,
Right.
just because he happens to be able to interpret. You know, there are people in the medical profession who do some interpreting. There are diplomats who have to do a lot of interpreting. Ambassadors oftentimes interpret for their own prime minister. They do their interpret. Well, my goodness, you know, the rank of an ambassador being used as an interpreter would, just in the normal, human sense, might be considered a mottainai usage of the ambassador's ability. But the ambassador himself or herself probably would not consider that as being mottainai. It may be that the ambassador may feel that they're using him or her that in a job that is below the dignity of the position as ambassador. The person may feel that.
No,
I do not regard that as a mottainai usage of the person's.
No, I'm not talking about the ambassador. I'm talking about you as being an interpreter.
Well, I think I'm using this example because using me as an interpreter is not mottainai at all. It's normal.
But you can certainly qualify to be called an ambassador yourself instead of
No.
Taiyo no kake. Taiheiyo no kakehashi. The word that's music to our ears, kakehashi. It sounds like it's a stateless person,
Matsumoto-san.
Yeah.
Do you know what a kakehashi is?
I thought very hard on that.
Well,
Yet I'm not getting anywhere.
Yeah. I've often said a kakehashi is a bridge.
Yes.
It's a bridge across the Pacific.
Yes.
Bridges are, the purpose of a bridge is to be walked upon.
What about, I think it sounds like that you have two
sokoku,
two fatherlands.
So.
That's a contradiction in terms.
No. So, if people think that they're walking on me as a bridge, it's a natural thought as an interpreter. Makes no difference who I am. If I'm interpreting, I'm doing a job that is required, that's essential to get proper communication between individuals or among individuals. And so at that particular time, performing the role of an interpreter has nothing to do with mottainai. Absolutely nothing. It's a job to be done, and you do it. That's it.
Can that particular bridge?
I don't regard myself as being a wasteful use of my talents just because somebody makes me interpret it.
Just playing the devil's advocate, can a case be made that an interpreter can be transformed into an ambassador for the country that he or she represents?
What do you mean?
You've been interpreting for Japan, for the United States, for the U.S. Embassy, but sometimes, but your inner voice says, "Hey, it's time you got into doing something that requires more visibility."
I've never had an experience like that or a thought like that.
Oh, really?
No. Well,
That's very different.
I think very fortunately,
Ah.
Through through the decades of experience in doing interpreting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether you would call it a philosophy or what you would call it.
It's a philosophy. You sound very philosophical about that sort of thing.
But
you and I seem to have fallen away with each other because I just wanted to get the job of a diplomat or a debater because I've been frustrated.
I'm afraid that I cannot either rationalize or justify the thought that an individual being used as an interpreter is a waste of that individual's
I'm not saying that.
position or
yeah, don't get me wrong. I didn't say to that maybe because I blame it on my poor English.
No.
Because the nature of interpreting, it's sometimes I think it's nothing there. Hollow feeling. Interpret beautifully, and I can grin from year to year. I did a good job, and I don't get much credit because the embassy didn't like me very much, and you left embassy for Sony. Hey sensei, he don't walk out on me. I felt abandoned. I felt like a fatherless child. So I'm nothing. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to pick up where I left off down in Osaka? And I got into debating too. Here I am.
Matsumoto-san,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I didn't desert you. It just happened that way.
Don't do this to me.
Because both Mr. Moita and Mr. Ibuka wanted to use me in their company. And so they offered me a job that I couldn't say no to.
And can't refuse.
So I started working for that company. But after the 2 years or so that you were at the American Embassy,
Right.
You resigned and went off to other activities. And I still remember that the first time that I met you afterwards in Osaka, where you had sponsored a meeting, a large meeting, and you demonstrated simultaneous interpreting on the stage. Frankly, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that your ability had really moved up to where you were really a competent interpreter.
I give you the credit for that.
No.
I owe you a debt of gratitude.
No.
No, I mean it.
I treated you very
Well,
very badly.
I totally disagree with you. And
you asked.
Well,
you asked me when you started working in the embassy. You asked me to be rough on me. You said, "Please be rough on me," and like a fool,
no.
an honest fool.
Yeah.
I was really tough.
Yeah, you were, but I appreciate that. And it was a giant leap for a man, if not for mankind, because seeing you was a fatal attraction. And still, I'm just worshiping the ground you walk on.
Don't do that.
Oh, yes, I will.
Don't do that.